So we are live with Senator Richard Blumenthal. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Wonderful to be with you. I'm very excited to
Yeah,
join you again.
yeah, no, this is great. I'm so glad. And I'm going to just jump right in because we have so much going on and so much sort of somewhat chaos. But as you were saying to me just a minute ago, you got home very late this morning, last night, from what can only be described as a historic vote. So if you'd like to share some of where your thoughts are with that whole process from yesterday, that would be great.
Well, I will be very personal about it. It was saddening and scary for me. Scary because I thought of all the people who suffer from pre-existing conditions and whose access to healthcare now is threatened because this nominee, now a justice on the Supreme Court, said that she felt that the court made a mistake by upholding the Affordable Care Act, and scared for women who may lose reproductive freedoms, for the victims and survivors of gun violence, because laws in Connecticut that stop gun violence may be struck down by a justice whose view of the Second Amendment is so extreme and radical. So scared, saddened, frustrated, and in a way angry, because I wish we had the numbers to stop the latest nominee and the previous two, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. But all the more reason why we ought to be working hard for you and other candidates, top to bottom, in this election.
Absolutely. I can't say enough for that. And I have to tell you that as the mother of two girls, and even just as a mother of, a son, I have to say that it was extraordinary to me, the conversation around the fact that, people keep saying, oh, the Democrats are now going to pack the court. Well, first of all, historically speaking, it's been larger. It's been, it would not be unprecedented, but certainly when the nomination was held up for Merrick Garland, previously, that changed the number of the court, which is certainly something, people should be thinking about. And then for one president to have three justices, and again, the Republican Party kept saying that they didn't want activist judges. Well, I don't think you're going to get much more activists than the three that have been placed on the court. So incredibly frustrating as someone whose children will live with these judges for the majority of their lives.
That's right. All of our children, my 4 children, your children, everybody on this
grandchildren,
call, for decades. And you're absolutely right. I can remember when I was a law clerk on the Supreme Court for Justice Black, we talked about, should it be 13? Should it be 9? Should it be 11? This issue's been around for a long time. So there's nothing novel about considering the number of people on the court, or for that matter, terms or limits on age and similar kinds of.
Yeah, I think that that's all sort of on the table now. And you mentioned the ACA, you mentioned gun violence, those are all things that are, near and dear to our hearts in terms of especially pre-existing conditions, because often there's not a lot of agreement on that. But I also would like to bring up the fact that the Senate has now adjourned until after the election. And one of the questions that we received from Robin Schwartz was, what have been the real effects on working people and small businesses due to the failure to pass a second stimulus bill? And with the adjournment now till the 9th, we still don't have a stimulus bill.
That's a great question. And thank you to Robin for asking it.
Yeah.
The effect that I see going around the state of Connecticut has been catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
Small businesses hang by a thread, theaters that have no way of reopening right now. Restaurants, all kinds of similar kinds of enterprises that depend on people coming into their establishments are facing a really dark time, and they need an extension of Paycheck Protection Program. Likewise, families still going to the food banks,
absolutely,
and so forth. I'm sure you see in your area. And I've been so impressed by your calling attention to this issue in your newsletters and so forth. But I think that's the kind of compassionate and passionate approach that we need in a state representative. And, the the pandemic relief program that Nancy Pelosi passed out of the House with support from House Democrats should have been voted in the Senate. In fact, I went to the floor of the Senate on Saturday, and I asked for unanimous consent to pass a number of measures approved in the House by a bipartisan majority. They were all blocked, all of them blocked. And it's just unconscionable the way Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have bottled up a really needed pandemic relief program for state and local governments. You're seeing it in your towns that they are very hard pressed for funds, more testing and vaccine development. We are still in the midst of a ravaging pandemic and an economic crisis.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were out at Rentschler Field together a few weeks ago, and I will tell you, I had been there also the week before, obviously working for Food Share, and we were handing out information about our new hours. And I will tell you that when you are handing out information and not the food, you really get into conversations with people that are there. And there was a significant concern. Will Food Share be there through the winter? You know, I had one woman tell me that for a variety of reasons, she was not able to get her tax return back. It sounded like, you know, incredible red tape this year, but that's normally how she pays her heating bill for the winter. And so significantly, you know, we have 70% of people who are showing up there who've never received help before. So when there's this myth about welfare queens and everything else, these are not the people who are showing up in these lines. And when you say it's unconscionable, that is absolutely correct, because as you know, it's not just Connecticut, it's across the nation that we're seeing this. There are food banks that have actually gone under in other parts of the country because of how bad it is and how much, you know, how desperate it is for people. So when you combine that with, you know, God forbid you have something go wrong health-wise, whether it's COVID or something else. I mean, people are really in a terrible state. And you mentioned theaters. You know, the arts community has taken, as you know, such a significant hit. I would say even in Avon and Canton, you know, we have the Farmington Valley Arts Center in Avon. We have a very diverse community of artists in Collinsville. It's so clearly painful. And, you know, we're going to encourage people to shop small this month, you know, this coming month, right? But how do you, you know, how do you do that? And how do you make people feel safe at the same time that COVID numbers are rising?
I have been so impressed by your being at the food bank at Rentschler Field. Whenever I've been there, handing out food, just volunteering, and thank you for that service. But you're absolutely right that it affects the whole country. And the other point to make about that Rentschler Field food bank facility is so many of the people are telling me they've never been in a line before.
Yeah.
They've never had to ask for this kind of food. They never thought they would.
Right.
And it's a real tragedy. And the small businesses particularly, you know, people who've poured their lives and hearts into businesses, they kept them alive over years, sometimes decades. And now this so-called gap has turned into a chasm. We were supposed to bridge the gap with a temporary program. And now for many of them, they can't open until well into next year. So the failure to act by the Republican majority Senate, I think, really has to be held accountable. I hope it will on November 3rd.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of accountability on November 3rd in terms of, you know, I keep saying none of this had to happen. You know, we had things in place that were not followed. We had people who were watching China who, you know, said, you know, they're starting to build hospitals and all of these things. I will tell you, as someone who is on Twitter, like you are, you know, even anecdotally, you could see what was happening. So really, you know, had we handled this better and in terms of a national response, I think it could have been so much different, not just in Connecticut, but across the nation. And so I know you were just at an election, press conference before coming to us. And we actually had another question from Alex Lickler. What is the mechanism to protect the integrity of this election and prevent the president, or any candidate for that matter, to declare victory before all the ballots have been counted? And certainly both as a lawyer and as a senator, I'm sure you have a lot to say about that.
That is a very, very important question. In fact, we addressed it in part today. And as you well know, Donald Trump, I think it was last night or this morning, tweeted big problems with, and big problems and discrepancies with mail-in votes. All the votes have to be counted by November 3rd. And of course, we know mail-in ballots in a number of states will not be counted by midnight on November 3rd.
They will not. Here either.
And that's absolutely right. But every vote will count.
Mm-hmm.
So I will actually be asking the social media titans, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai of Google and Alphabet, and Jack Dorsey of Twitter, what their plan is. If the president all of a sudden says, I won, I lost, no more counting of votes. That's one of our nightmares, right?
Yeah.
And my hope is they have a plan, because certainly Trump has a plan. The Russians have a plan. They're meddling already. And some of what they're doing is absolutely chilling.
Right.
And Trump and the Republicans have a plan to continue to spread misinformation and disinformation. Fortunately, Twitter labeled as misleading that tweet, but Facebook and Twitter and Google have to have the determination, backbone, grit to stop him, in effect, declaring himself the victor. And the state officials, both Republican and Democrat, have to stand up to him and continue counting.
Right.
So we have, I will say, an army of lawyers spread across the country. When I say we, I mean Democrats in the Democratic caucus, the Biden campaign, the congressional campaign. Literally, we have multitudes of lawyers ready to go to court, state and federal court, to stop any shenanigans. And also, obviously, we'll use our megaphone to tell the nation that no, he hasn't won, if in fact he falsely declares victory. Now, I will say this, and this is the most important thing I have to say in this entire conversation. People must vote.
Right.
If people do vote, I really think we're going to have a decisive victory that will forestall all of this bad stuff from happening. If we have a decisive victory, I see no way that he can credibly declare himself victor. By this point, you know, so many people have so little trust in his credibility. He's so shredded his own reputation that I think a decisive victory will put it to rest. But, you know, vote, have a plan to vote, and bring 5 people to the polls with you.
Absolutely. And I will say, actually, that transitions nicely into a question from Carrie Firestone. Can you speak to the voter who says, Connecticut is a blue state, my vote doesn't matter? Because certainly we hear that. We also hear people who just fill in the president and the vice president, and they forget about the other people that are on the ballot because maybe they don't know enough about those folks, or, you know, so if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Well, I just said that the most important thing is to vote. I'll say again, the most important thing is to vote, but vote for everyone, not just the president. And your vote does matter, because in these state representative and state senate races, you're really deciding on the people who are going to make the most difference in your lives. Much as I think of myself as very important, United States Senator, just as I did when I was Attorney General, I'll tell you, I made the most difference for people when I was a state representative and a state senator. I dealt with people day in and day out. I was there every day. People knew where to get me. I could help them with any number of problems, sometimes calling my United States Senator to get him to help me. And I welcome those calls, because the most satisfying and important work any of us do is for our individual constituents. And it matters so much to your everyday lives. So please tell your neighbors, your friends, you know, people who worship with you or go to school with you, you know, this voting thing is really important, not just to elect a president, but all of these state offices really make such a difference. And that's where I see one of the biggest effects in Connecticut. If we have a great turnout, yeah, we'll do a lot for Joe Biden. We'll win it for Joe Biden
Right.
in Connecticut, but we're also going to have a state legislature that will stand up for reproductive freedoms. You know, we codified Roe v. Wade. When I was in the state Senate, I helped to lead that effort. Well, you're going to help insulate Connecticut from a Supreme Court that might strike down gun violence laws, might strike down laws that protect reproductive freedom rights, workplace safety, voting rights. The state legislatures make such a huge difference. And of course, the drawing of congressional district lines as well, and state legislative lines.
Well, and I think what people don't necessarily realize about the state legislature is that regardless of who is in quote unquote control, there are bills that are suggested every year. Many of them end up dead, but there are bills suggested every year. I know there was the suggestion of a bill in 2017 that actually made me start thinking about running in terms of when to allow a woman to get an abortion in the state of Connecticut. And it was one of those things where it's like people think that, you know, certain things couldn't happen here or wouldn't happen here. But every year, you know, there are some pieces of legislation that I personally don't agree with, that, you know, and that's, you know, that's the delicate balance of a state representative. You have to balance what you personally feel with what your district wants. And put your personal views aside to serve your district as best you can. But certainly, you know, in terms of the word firewall, I mean, in a lot of ways, the states have become that firewall. And we saw it this year with the response to the pandemic. Who ended up really in charge of keeping their citizens safe? Well, it was the states, because we had no true national response. And I know Senator Murphy talks about that frequently. I know you do as well. So, you know, there are so many things and so many questions that we have, and we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us, and you know, hoping that I get there to do some of that good work
I'm hoping
in the near future. But no, and I would just say, you know, thank you so much for the work that you have done on our behalf, because, you know, I certainly sleep better at night knowing that you're out there fighting the good fight for us, and it's critically important. So, you know, I think when you're telling everybody,
doubt that you sleep well at night because you work so hard during the day.
that is true. And someone mentioned that recently. I will say, you know, we've got another question from Matt Gianquinto. How do we respond to the damage Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans have done to the Supreme Court by impeaching the two illegitimate justices or by adding members to the court?
That's an open question right now.
Yeah.
It's a very good and pertinent question. You know, I think that everything's on the table so far as I'm concerned. The former Vice President, Joe Biden, has said he's going to appoint a commission to report back within 180 days. I think we ought to do it more quickly. I've already begun in my own staff, I'm on the Judiciary Committee, doing very extensive research and study into the different options. Because let's face it, the Supreme Court's political, legal, ideological balance is now going to be way right. This new justice shifts it radically to the right. Without going into all the details on what we know about her record and what she's likely to do, striking down the Affordable Care Act, maybe overturning Roe v. Wade, striking down gun violence protection, we need to move the court back to the mainstream, to the country's view of what the law should be. The majority of Americans, for example, favor background checks for people to...
Majority of Americans favor gay marriage.
Exactly. And so we need to make sure that the court is not out of line. And whether we do it through age limit, term limits, retirement requirements, new justices,
right.
I think we need to consider everything. And, you know, maybe we'll be so astonished and surprised that this new justice will be 180 degrees the opposite of what she's expected to be, but not likely. and
Well, it was,
recently.
yeah, and I would say it was concerning to me to see already this morning there was basically a campaign ad that included, her as a justice, which I just thought I found honestly bizarre, considering the, supposedly neutral nature of justices. I was honestly, there's not a lot that shocks me, but that was shocking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they've
uh,
shattered the norms, as the question implies. Mitch
yes,
McConnell has shattered all the norms. Just to have a justice
right,
appointed
right,
days before the election,
right.
confirmed a week before the American people could have their say.
Right. It's really unconscionable, honestly, in my opinion. So I so appreciate, you spending time with us today and answering those questions. I think we've mostly gotten through all of the questions. I just wanted to give you a chance if there's perhaps some closing statement you want to make, because I know that this is quite the week for all of us, and you'll probably be bouncing from event to event.
All I can say is thank you to you for putting yourself on the line. I know that it is no easy sacrifice for you, for your family. Thanks to Callista for helping us with the call. But what I would say to everybody who is listening, we often say, I think I've said it probably 20, if I've said it 100, I don't know. This is the most important election of our lives.
Yeah.
And uh, I've said it before in other elections, this one really is the most important. As Michelle Obama said, vote as if your life depended on it. And in fact, in my view, your life does depend on it. This last 4 weeks on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate has been so deeply frustrating and frightening about where the country will go if we have another 4 years of this president and this Senate. And I just think we have a historic obligation. You'll be asked by your children, your grandchildren at some point, what did you do during that time when the country was tested? And you'll want to say, I was out there making phone calls, knocking on doors. Maybe it's only virtually. I was supporting financially, even though it wasn't a lot. Every bit matters. Or I was doing whatever I could, writing notes, and on the day of the election, voting, or before, I've already voted, and making sure other people vote too.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical. And I will tell you, I got a very inspiring text from a friend today who said that her husband basically has never voted, and he is filling out his ballot today and sending it in. And that's what makes it all worth it. I certainly had always made calls for candidates at the national level before 2016. But I just have to say, I never, ever wanted to feel the way I did the day after the 2016 election, like I had not done enough. And so I hope that people are digging deep. I hope they're calling into other states, and not just for the presidential races. I hope they are calling into Maine. I hope they're calling into Arizona. I hope they're calling into Pennsylvania, North Carolina, anywhere in this country, sending texts, whatever it is that they can do, because I have frequently told the story that for 6 months after I lost, I could barely go to the grocery store because somebody would burst into tears on me. Now that's one teeny infinitesimal little election. and it was because I think there were some people who felt they hadn't done enough for me, which, in the grand scheme of things, not such a big deal. But, I don't want anybody to wake up on November 4th, or when we finally have the results of this, and feel like they had not done enough at the, to help elect a new president. So I certainly hope that that's the case. So I thank you so much.
A famous story, you've heard it, I'm sure, 20 times. Tip O'Neill lost his first election, was walking into the grocery store. Woman came up to him, I'm so sorry, Tip, you lost. And he said, I just can't understand it. I thought I was well-known and popular. And she said, well, Tip, I didn't vote for you. And he said, well, why not? You never asked. So you are asking. You are asking.
Oh, I'm absolutely asking. And it's funny, as I've been making phone calls, I always make phone calls and I always knock doors. But there are still people who say to me, when they realize it's me answering my own phone, or it's me calling them, you're actually calling? It's like, yes, that's my job. And if I don't know what's going on in the district, I feel like in some ways the legislature is like a computer. If you want good, you want good output, you have to have good input. So in the same way that we want to make sure that the legislation coming out of the legislature is good, you have to make sure that you know what's going on in your district so that you're informed when you get up there enough to create legislation that actually makes a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I hope to do. And I know that is what you've done for us. So I thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And thanks again for being here today, Senator.
Thank you. And I look forward to phoning you next Wednesday. I'm knocking on wood.
Right. As they say, as my grandmother would say, God willing and the creek don't rise.
Yeah. Well, keep at it. Keep up the
Yes.
great work. I'm really
Thanks so
proud
much.
to
Thank you.
be your
Appreciate
friend.
it. Thank you.
Take care.